Our second speaker is Giorgos Styris. He's associate professor in the University of Athens. His expertise is on medieval and Renaissance philosophy. He has published extensively on Niccolò Machiavelli, on morality in the law, on cosmology and philosophy of law in medieval philosophy, on ethics and politics on Al-Farabi, and on the counter between Byzantine and Western philosophy. All this is in Greek, so for the non-Greek speakers, impossible to read, but there are a lot of important contributions in the very recent Encyclopedia of Renaissance Philosophy, published in Springer, which I think it's online, so you can look it up. If I were you, I would do it. There's a lot of very interesting articles on figures what have importance for this period, and the floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and all of you for being here. I'm afraid that my paper is more technical, and I will speak about the aesthetic element of ritual propriety in Confucian ethics. The connection between aesthetics and ethics is a close one because they are both forms of value, as Wittgenstein pointed out. The ancient Greeks had a term to describe this connection, kalokagathia, from the expression kalos kagathos, the beautiful and the good. This concept makes sense in the context of ancient Greek thought, which stresses the importance of harmony and balance in every human expression. Confucius also associates the good and the beautiful. Li, translated variously as ritual propriety, ritual etiquette or propriety, has a central role in Confucianism, but its complexity is usually misunderstood. Some scholars interpret ritual behaviors as attempts to defend conservative practices that, from the idealized Chinese past. However, by a closer examination of the nature and function of ritual propriety, as described in the Analects, it becomes apparent that it is a broader concept. The rites of Li are not rites in the Western conception of religious custom. Rather, Li embodies the entire spectrum of interaction with humans, nature, and even material objects. Confucius includes in his discussions of ritual propriety such diverse topics as learning, titles, mourning, and governance. I intend to argue that ritual propriety actually has key role within Confucian ethics and politics and adds aesthetic elements to these fields. Predominantly, the 3rd and 10th books of the Analects are focused on ritual propriety. The ritual network includes religious and political ceremonies and norms of political and social etiquette. These were overlapping aspects of ritual and social etiquettes, and it is not always easy to distinguish between rites, ceremonies, and manners. All these are called Li. Li, ritual propriety, is a dominant concept of Confucian philosophy. It is the path through which Ren, perfect humaneness, can be attained in individuals and order restored to society. The ideogram for Ren is man on left and Tu on the right. According to Confucius, human beings are always defined through others. One cannot exist without the other. Therefore, human interaction and its terms are crucial for Confucius. Perfect humaneness, the highest virtue in Confucian ethics, is not some abstract concept of ends expressed in human interaction. Confucius holds that ritual propriety is valuable in itself because it is rewarding aesthetically and psychologically and generates a kind of wisdom. According to Confucius, the acquisition of ritual skills transforms one's perspective and confirms the absolute value of those skills. In using Li, Confucius wrote, harmony should be valued. When it is well used, ritual propriety is the oil that keeps the wheels of our social life turning. It is harmonious and in turn leads to greater social harmony. According to Confucius, a large part of living wisely involves making use of this ritual propriety to bring a greater degree of elegance and harmony to our life and to the lives of others. If we can effectively shape our interactions through ritual propriety, we would be able to benevolence or humanism. It is obvious that Li has a crucial role in Confucian philosophy. Ritual propriety forms a set of codes that regulate in detail every sphere of human conduct. Therefore, it is a formalized set of rules for communities aimed to improve their cohesion and ensure their orderly function. It designates each person's exact place within a smaller or larger community. Confucius is adamant that the laws of a state alone will not bring the desired result, namely social order. Nevertheless, controlling the citizens' behaviors through ritual propriety is much more effective because through shame, voluntary conformity is achieved. Confucius aims to move the people to the ritual propriety. For this reason, he supports that adhering to the ritualistic order must be combined with perfect humanism. According to Confucius, the man who embodies perfect humanism and conforms to ritual propriety is a noble man, Hun Chi. Confucius reclaims the term, removes any aristocratic connotation, and focuses on meritocracy. A noble man adheres to ritual propriety and seeks to actualize the way, Dao, with perfect humanism. His actions are aligned with beauty and grace. The noble man not only serves as a moral exemplar, but also demonstrates a level of ritual mastery in which rituals are no longer cumbersome and restrictive. Those who become noble men not only follow ritual propriety, but they also can express themselves in creative and novel ways. A special place in Confucian ethics takes Shu, being accommodative. It is taking oneself as measure of our behavior towards others. However, Confucian thought does not limit itself in the negative version of the golden rule, that is to avoid treating others as we would not like to be treated. It certainly encompasses the notion that through our actions we offer ourselves as models to others, we become moral legislators for our entire community. It is important to clarify that we should not see Confucius philosophy through the lenses of the individualism of our modern times. Human behavior is dictated by ritual commands. This should not be conceived as submission to the will of others, but that even discord is expressed in the appropriate way. Along the same lines, there is the concept of Yi, righteousness, through which Confucius aims to demonstrate that everyone appreciates appropriate behavior, though always within the context of ritual propriety. Social etiquette is an endless primer of methods which we can draw upon appropriate action in every occasion. Moreover, the concept of De, virtue, applies to how noble men govern through the moral shining virtue of their deeds. Through the ritual propriety, everything in the world returns to perfect humanism. Of course, internalization of ritual propriety is achieved through intense study and effort. Our ritual is valued not only for its practical dimension or for the benefit it brings, but also it goes along with a certain beauty. The link between ritual propriety and beauty is evident in the passage 112. It is where Confucius stresses that ritual propriety requires harmony, which is the beauty of the way of the former kings and a source of great deeds. Great deeds are beautiful as much and harmonious. Particularly, in 113, Master Yo states that when ritual propriety guides respect, we will be far from shame and disgrace. It becomes clear that any behavior that diverts from the context of ritual propriety is disregarded. Even respect can lead to a deviation or failure if it is not shown in the appropriate way. A show of respect punctuated with theatrics and verbalism can cancel out its purpose, regardless of the honest intentions of the person who pays respect. Again, ritual propriety dictates the appropriate ways. Furthermore, in passage 2.5, Confucius revisits the link between ritual propriety and respect, providing a notable example. Filial piety, the noblest manifestation of this sentiment, serves as model for all social and political interactions and is consistently tied in with ritual propriety. A son's duty is to bury his parents and pay them tribute with the appropriate sacrifices according to the etiquette. As pedantic as that might seem, Confucius had realized the deep practical wisdom of the ritual propriety, especially regarding funerals, on which he insists. The main goal of the etiquette is primarily not to let people on their own in mourning. The gathering of family and friends aims to provide the support needed in these hard times. In addition, the strict funeral rites, with the numerous obligations during the first days, keep mourners occupied to avoid losing themselves in lamentations and self-absorption. The social visits after the funeral and the sacrificial offerings at the ancestral altar serve the same purpose. If the mourner decides to deviate from the proper ways, there is the risk of exaggerated mourning, and it is rather unpleasant personal and social consequences. However, in 3.4 Confucius remarks that, in funerals, expression of personal pain comes before adhering to the ritual's protocol without substance. The protocol should not get in the way of the expression of pain. I would say that the example in 2.6 and 2.7 is even more illuminating. Confucius questions the common idea of his time that filial piety primarily means covering the basic survival and nutritional needs of the parents. Confucius then wonders what is a human's difference from animals, since we provide food for them too. The answer he gives is respect. In other words, without the appropriate sentiment of respect when food is offered, a wealthy person might offer to his parents the most expensive and refined meals, but with a demeaning and offensive way. On the other hand, you may have someone who covers their parents' basic survival needs and offers them a humble meal, but with the proper manner. Evidently, Confucius would consider the latter approach as the appropriate one, as in that behavior, beauty and respect go hand in hand. In fact, the ethics of ritual propriety that Confucius introduces can also be applied in politics. In 2.20, Qin Kangqi asks Confucius how he can win over the people. Confucius responds that people's veneration will be won with the appropriate approach, not so much with the results. People seek from politicians to be treated with dignity, to pay respect to parents, and to be compassionate to the rest. Therefore, not everything is judged according to what is offered and what is achieved, as advocates of utilitarian politics claim. Confucius neither ignores nor does he dismiss the importance of securing adequate standards of living for the people. Nevertheless, he highlights the importance of providing for the people in a nice manner to achieve the appropriate political result and ensure the excellent function of the state. The link between ethics and aesthetics is also evident in 3.3, where Confucius vividly associates ritual propriety with perfect humanism. Specifically, he remarks that ritual propriety without perfect humanism is useless. It is clear that he is not interested in blind obedience, but adherence to ritual propriety with substance. The manner is important, but the substance of the act is equally important, motive and objective. In fact, in 3.12, he mentions that in offering sacrifices, which of course falls under the protocols of rituals, if people do not participate to them with their soul, it is not better than not offering them at all. It should be noted that virtue could be attained only through voluntary conformity with the ritual propriety. Following rituals without deep inwardness is mere formalism, and Confucius expresses his discontent for the fact that in his age they are usually considered as merely conventions. However, simply following the ritual propriety behaviors does not constitute perfect humanism. As much as Confucius praises the ancient ways, he does note at times that it might be appropriate to alter rituals to suit contemporary circumstances. Ritual propriety helps to shape perfect humanism, but perfect humanism is not totally defined through ritual propriety, because there is also some flexibility to depart from existing ritual propriety. However, this flexibility must be understood within a general acceptance of existing ritual propriety behavior. Meanwhile, he insistently rejects any unjustified change to the rituals as it undermines socio-political stability. Confucius places utmost importance to ritual propriety, as in 317 he insists that despite his contemporaries' objections, his own duty is to ensure that ritual propriety is observed. Ritual propriety mostly bind the elite, so they do not mistreat the people. The ethical and aesthetical ideal turns social aristocracy to moral aristocracy. Even the riches are not acceptable if they are not attained in accordance with the way. Again, the end does not justify the means. What matters most is the manner, although it might bring no result or even lead to poverty. Disregarding an end due to the use of ill means is also evident in 414, where Confucius explicitly states that authority positions or fame should not be pursued in the wrong way. People must follow the way, regardless of whether it may lead them to positions of power. The role of the nobleman is what is beneficial. In this same perspective, it is interesting to examine Confucius' opinion on wealth. Confucius does not reject it, although he admits its corrupting role. Instead, he states that what is important is the way it is used. His advice is not to reject riches, but to use them to the benefit of society. Emphasis on the manners is also evident in 14.1, where Confucius remarks that it is shameful for someone to earn their salary from a state where the way is absent. That is, if nothing around a man happens the proper way, he should not accept the salary for his work. It is the man that broadens the way, not the way that broadens the man. Confucius touches again the issue of ritual propriety by encouraging his speaker to be a scholar with manners or a nobleman. Therefore, education on its own is not enough. Its value relies on being acquired in the appropriate way. We could refer to this as an ontology of ritual propriety that permits the Confucian thought. Beings are dependent of the way they are realized, but their substance does not remain unchanged. They are determined and valued by the way they have been realized. In the passage 6:27, the role of ritual propriety reemerges. Knowledge is not enough to prevent people from digression. Ritual propriety takes up this role, complementing knowledge, and is the one that keeps the nobleman in line. The ultimate ideal, the point of self-actualization of a perfect man, is to offer himself as an example. In other words, to become an ethical, aesthetical legislator for his community. Such level of virtue cannot be attained only with knowledge. On the other hand, the lack of rituals leads to some sort of degradation. In 8.2, Confucius explicitly states that respectfulness without ritual propriety becomes laborious bustle. Boldness becomes insubordination, and straightforwardness becomes rudeness. It is evident that virtue alone is not enough, but requires the ritual propriety to acquire its full meaning at its point of actualization. A virtue is actualized in accordance with its nature only when it's pursued in the proper way. In the passage 8.4, Confucius goes into detail as to what proper conduct consists of and how it is achieved: movements, expression, words, and intonation. Competence and aspiration to virtue foster beauty, the aesthetics of action. Moreover, he clarifies his point in 8.21, when he explains that a man without flows may look poor in his ordinary garments, but his robes are elegant in sacrifice rituals. Every occasion requires different aesthetics according to the substance of each ritual. After all, cultivation in social etiquette and music is necessary for a person to reach a position of power. In addition, Confucius insists on the importance of correct pronunciation. Specifically, when someone read official texts and participated to rituals, he sought to use the proper pronunciation because the text acquired a higher value in it. In an attempt to focus on ritual propriety, Confucius articulates the golden rule of ethics: never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself. He does not probably realize that, in this way, his ethics are heterodetermined, and someone is not really actualized as a moral person. His behavior is determined by the actions of others and not by his own pursuits. Confucius insists that ritual propriety is an essential element in moral self-cultivation, which is one of his main contributions. At the same time, the social and performative aspects of etiquette provide an aesthetic dimension to the political function of moral self-cultivation. Etiquette is part of a complex web that connects morality, religion, and politics. The mastery of etiquette may allow for some flexibility within appropriate situations, but these divergences from the norm must always be recognizable and acceptable to others in order for them to be effective as transformational actions. In this vein, the successful practice of etiquette depends on the development of an aesthetic style which expresses to others one's personal dispositions and, by extension, one's perfect humanity. Thus, reverence for past traditions is supported by creative innovations. Therefore, Confucian ethical ontology is not an ontology of what, but of how. This explains Confucius' formalism, his descriptiveness, but also his poetic tone. As long as we attempt to discover what is virtue, Confucius' texts will respond with misleading and contradictory answers. On the other hand, answers to the question, how is virtue, will bring us closer to what Confucius meant to say with his analogies. An ontology of how may have the downside that it focuses on the description of the real world rather than the question whether the world is real, which is a common characteristic for grounded practical philosophies such as the Chinese. But it has the upside that it strives to understand virtue. Confucian ontology of how does not oppose the Platonic Aristotelian ontology of substance, but complements it. The how of reality becomes known with the deliberate participation to the way that constitutes the how. In other words, through interaction. The way people coexist demonstrates the rationality of the associations of living and functioning together. We can know the substance of something, that is, from the way it participates to being. Reality is unimportant. We get to know and participate to reality because each person forms several connections through its life. Every person actualizes substance, the nature of being, with its unique way. The way of being amounts to the totality of interactions among beings. Everyone interacts with everything, but every human interaction with other beings is unique. The uniqueness of individual agency reflects to each individual connection formed. Freedom is synonym to actualization and discovery of the personal way of being. All that determines being, nature, freedom, belonging in a species, otherness, indicates a way, not a what, but a how. Thank you.